So, rapid application development, lesson 7, part 3. Lists, loops, and printing. And by the way, when I say printing, young sirs, I'll tell you this, that we don't do a lot of printing these days. When we make apps, you don't do a lot of it, right? Sometimes you need to do it depending on the type of app you're making, but there's not a lot of call for it unless you're doing some kind of like point of sale where you're printing to like almost like a smaller printer or something like that. And in which case you probably use some kind of custom reporting, which we'll talk about. So what are we going to cover today? We got 65 slides and about an hour left. I can probably do it in an hour because I'm going to skip a few things. Okay, talk about list boxes and combo boxes, differentiate between available types of combo boxes. We can go over that really quickly. Enter items into list boxes using the item collections in the properties window. Add and remove items in a list at runtime. Determine which item in a list is selected. Use the items.count property to determine the number of items in a list. And display a selected item from a list. Use the do, while, and for loops. We're going to learn about loops today. And no, I have to say, not learn about them. We're going to revisit them here in C#, like as if you've never seen them before. You should have seen them by now. We're not going to talk about for each. We're going to wait for that for next week, right? Because for each is specific for arrays. And we're going to skip to the next iteration of a loop by using the continue statement. We're going to show you how to do that. And the have information to the printer with the print preview window using the print document class. Print document class is a cumbersome beast, right? And you're going to see how ugly it is. And I would recommend to you that you learn Crystal Reports, right? If you can. I won't cover it in this course because it's almost like 2 classes on its own, how to do it right. But some self-learning would be needed there. Okay, list boxes and combo boxes. What are they? You get them from your toolbox, right, inside Visual Studio. What do? There's different types. There's list boxes. They have different a look to them, right? They hold different kinds of information in different ways. The same collection of information can be, it's almost like the list box presents the scroll bar automatically depending on how much information you want to show and how big the actual box is that you're showing, right? The combo box actually has a few different options. There is a simple combo box that looks like this. This is a standard combo box, and this is a drop-down list box, right, which actually doesn't show anything at all, right? So there's 3 different types of combo boxes, and the list boxes change according to how big they are. So let's take a look at our hands-on assignment as an example. So I'm going to close this solution. And by the way, the solution we were just working on in part 2 of our lesson 7, right, is up in Blackboard. You can look at the final solution, which is almost exactly like I've shown you here and we did together, right? It just might be slightly different, some slightly different variable names. So I'm going to open up our solution for today. It's going to be, again, our lesson 6 or lesson 7 hands-on. And you can download this file and look at it from Blackboard. So here it is. Lesson 7 hands-on has a couple of forms. We have the About form. We also have the Flavors form. So let's take a look at that. Here's Flavors form. And if you notice, in Flavors form, you have this type of combo box. And you can tell automatically it's a combo box by the name itself, combo box. And also, if you look at this drop-down right here, it tells you what type of combo box it is, or what kind of control it is. It says coffee combo box, and it's system.windows.forms.combo box control. Right, so you can see it right here. And same thing, if I click this one, it shows me as a list box, right, because it's called a syrup list box. Okay? So if you notice the combo box, this type of combo box here, right, and if I look at the type of combo box that I'm using, is you look at the drop-down style, it says drop-down. And that actually changes the look of the combo box. So if I change this drop-down style instead of drop-down to simple, now the combo box is different. It has a different look and feel to it altogether, right? Or if I change my drop-down style to drop-down list, or drop-down, right? Here's a drop-down. Here's drop-down list. So there's 3 different combo box looks and feels that do different things. Let's go back to the way it was, and there it is. Okay, so that's what a drop-down looks like. This is what a list box looks like. So they have most of the same properties, right? But the combo box has that extra drop-down style property that list boxes do not have, okay, that we talked about. And again, C#, if it's too small to display all the information, C# automatically adds a scroll bar that works pretty good for most controls. Okay. So again, the list of items that's displayed in a list box or combo box is called a collection. Okay? And a collection is like an array in some ways. Okay? We'll talk about that in a bit. It's got very similar properties. But the things you can do, the methods you can do to a collection, you can do an add items method. You can do a remove items method to a collection. You can refer to individual elements. You can count how many items are in the collection. You can also clear the collection. Those are different kinds of things you can do, the methods that you can use. Again, we're also starting with zero-based counting for collections, just like we do with arrays. So all collections are indexed with a 0 to start off with the first item, like most C-style languages. In fact, very rare do we see languages these days are indexed by 1, a 1 base index. Almost never. Yeah, very rare. There are some programs that do that, programming languages, but not the ones that we'll be using anytime soon. Filling lists. So there's different ways of doing it. You can do it at, if you're never going to change the list, you can do it at design time. So you can actually go into, just like it shows here in our app. If you notice, there's some items here in the list. And if you look at the collection, if I click on the ellipses, it'll show the items actually physically typed in here, because these items will never change, right? Now, I'll tell you that most applications I run with never have this. Usually list boxes are connected to a database somewhere, all right? There's a database backend for most of these items. Very rare do I have a fixed number of items in the list, and if I do, you know, it's for a very small app, okay? But in this particular case, these items, chocolate, hazelnut, Irish cream, and orange, are never going to change, and that's why they've been put in this collection like this at design time. If you need to do them at runtime, you can add the items.add or items.insert methods to add them in exactly the locations you need them inside the collection. Okay? So again, we kind of went over this already. Skip. And here's your general form for your object. So for example, objects.items.add, if you're going to add items method, and then the item value. For example, if I'm adding in a school list box, right, and I'm adding in Harvard as the school, then I'm going to say school list box.items.add Harvard. Okay? I can also add text information from another box. Like for example, school list box.items.add. I want to add that in from my schools.textbox.text. Right? So there might be one schools text box that I'm adding in from, or another combo box as an example, or a string. Right? So different things. They're all strings that I'm adding in, of course, if you notice, because collection is a collection of strings. Okay, here's the insert method. It does the same thing as adding, but it adds it at a specific location. Again, we're using zero-based counting. 0 would be the first location, 1 would be the second one. Okay. You can also you can change the sorted property to true, but if you do that, right, then you kill the positioning. If you want everything to be positioned in a specific way, then turn the sorted property to false. Otherwise, even if you position it and it's position 1, it might show up in position 5 if it's sorted, right? Because depending on what your string starts with, if you have the sorted property to true, then it'll sort it itself, and you'll say, hey, how come it didn't put the my string in the right position? But actually, it did. It's just it's not displaying it that way. Okay, selected index property. What do we do? Basically, it's used when the project is running and the user selects or highlights an item from the list. So it says, whatever item that the user selected, that is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at that index, right? If nothing is selected, then the selected index property has got a value of -1 to basically say I've got nothing selected, okay? So from there, you can say, well, whatever is selected, my selected index in my coffee types list box, okay, I want to set the selected index to 3. Or I want to get whatever the selected index is, wherever it is, and I want to get that and use that as an item, as information. the items.count property actually counts the physical items. So for example, here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items, right? So my items.count is 5, but my highest index is 4 because I only have, it goes from 0 to 4 with zero-based counting. If I want to reference the items collection itself, right? For example, I want to say, hey, I want to access the items by reference, which means by index. Yes?
What if they select multiple items in the combo box? What would selected index return?
It would select, it wouldn't return anything because you're selecting, you're using the control key to do it, right? It's a different kind of thing, right? We didn't cover that. Multiple items is like you using the control key to select different items, right? We're not making that kind of choice right here. We're making one item. Which item are you selecting in the index? Right? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Like a unique item, right? Or you can make it so it's a checkboxes, right? As an example, or radio. It's almost like a radio kind of thing, right? But very good question. So in this particular case, if I want to say my school list box.items2, the second item or the third item, this would be in our school list box. You want to make it, you want to assign it, this item here, this University of California, you can do that too. You can actually change the collection to whatever you put here, instead of adding and removing, and so on. You can also remove an item from a list, and you can remove it at a particular position by using the remove at method, right? So it says if you know the position of the item, for example, you want to pop the first item off of the list, you can use remove at 0, and it'll pop it off the list. And you can also use the remove method and what it'll do is actually search for that particular string, text string. It'll find it in your collection and remove it. That's totally different. So you don't know where the item is. You just want to pop that particular item off. It'll search for it, find it, and then remove it. So different ways of playing with collections. You can also clear the list itself. I want to items.clear would actually clear the item itself, like completely clear all items and empty a combo box or a list box. If I do items.clear, right? So if I say my school list box.items.clear, I clear all the entire list altogether. The collection is empty when I do that afterwards. Okay, so here's some events you can hang on to or hook onto. Selected index change. So if I change my selected index, which means I want to change from one item to the other, my text is changed. If I actually change the item itself, I can enter or leave the combo box itself. I can check for those things from a validation perspective as well. And I'm not going to go through what all these things do because it's pretty self-evident. The leave event is kind of cool. When you leave, to get the leave event to work, it fires when the control loses focus. So that's something to note. So if a control loses focus, then the leave event will go off, right? So if I move, whether it's I'm moving it through a tab key or I'm clicking on something else and the control loses focus, then the leave event fires and I can do something at that point. Okay. While and do while loops. So I kind of went over some list boxes and combo boxes fairly quickly, and now we're going to cover some while and do while loops. And again, if you don't know while and do while and we're sitting in this course, there's an issue. But let's talk about them briefly of how they work here. So again, when we do a while loop, there's two reasons why we would do them. A while loop checks the condition at the top of the test, or they do a pre-test, an entry test, right? And if the condition is good, then it does the stuff in the code block, right? A do while loop goes through, does the statements once, and then checks the condition again to see if I should repeat it. So do while loop always does the statements in the block once. While loop may or may not, depending on the condition. Both loops need some kind of a sentinel variable, right? They need a sentinel variable because if you don't, they'll go on forever, right? Because the condition somehow has to change for you to exit the loop, okay? And again, here's what the UML diagram would look like for these while and do while loops. Okay, if you're interested in understanding that. The bool data type let's look at that as well. In lesson 2, we looked at it, right? But the bool data type can be also, remember, if I say item found Boolean, right? If I say if item found Boolean or if item found Boolean is equal to true, both mean the exact same thing. They're synonymous when it comes to us programming, right? So in this particular case, we use Boolean data types, and sometimes we use them either as flags, sometimes we use them also where the condition's up or down, flag up, flag down, or switches, where we switch it on or off, right? So sometimes what you want to do is these are Boolean variables can be used to add a context to your code, right? To make sure that you understand what's going on here, and actually makes it easier when it comes down to programming something like this. When you're looking for an item in the list, example will be here. While item found Boolean. Well, if item found Boolean, that's like saying while item found Boolean is equal to true, right? If I say while not item found Boolean, it's the same as saying while item found Boolean is equal to false, right? Because if I put a not in front of a condition, it swaps true for false or false to true if I put the not in front, the not sign in front, right? So that's a good way of testing. So here we go again. It says while not item found Boolean is the same as saying while item found Boolean is equal to false, with double equals when you're doing comparison. Okay? So there's a good reasons why to use Booleans with while loops. And then here's an example of using a while loop with a list box. And again, you do two things. You're checking for item found Boolean. If you're searching for the item itself, and then you're checking to see in this particular case if the item integer is less than the item list box items.count. So you're counting how many items, and you're checking to see if the one you're looking for is in the list. You're checking for if it's inside within the range of the number of items you have. And you know what? I recommend to you that you do a lot of this stuff in try-catch blocks. Whenever you do things like searching for a number of items, making sure that you're in range, all that kind of stuff, it's a really good practice to use try-catch blocks to do any kind of calculations. In our last example, when we did how to do proper multi-form documents, if you look at the stuff that I have online, I use try-catch blocks to make sure that the age that I put in from a validation perspective is numeric, right? And I say if it's numeric, then that's great. I do a calculation, and then that's in the try portion of the try-catch block, and then in the catch portion, if it's non-numeric, it's going to error out. And if it errors out, I want it to produce this message. So in the catch portion of the try-catch block, I put a message box that says, hey, this is a numeric. Go back. And I reset the focus back to wherever the user enters his information, right? In this particular case, we're looking for an items list box. If my item integer is less than items list box that items.count, and that may run out of bounds somehow. So I probably will put this whole while and if and else kind of block inside a try-catch block. Chances are, to make sure I try and catch the majority of my errors. And by the way, if you don't know how to do a while or a for loop, like I said, or anything like that, if you forget the syntax, you can use code snippets, which we went over today again in our previous presentation. It'll show you, kind of produce a stub for you that you can fill out, and it'll make it work. So here's a for loop. Again, item maximum integer is equal to schools list box that items.count minus 1. And then what I'm saying is for index integer is equal to 0, and then index integer is less than maximum integer, and then index plus plus. In other languages, this will be plus. You can actually put other things in here as well, not just index integer plus plus. You can put other conditions. So, for example, I want to add 2 to my index. But you want to do something to the index here so that way it runs out. The condition in the middle, this is the initial condition here for Morse for loops. Remember this. It doesn't matter whether you're in PHP, JavaScript, whatever you're doing, any C-style language. Initial condition, terminating condition, and then something to modify your index, right? Your control variable, if you will, to exit the loop. If you don't do this properly, again, you could have an endless loop here as well. And here's the for loop as the general form, which we're not going to go over because you should know this already. Again, the test condition and the increment And I don't know why, but my for loop diagram is missing. That's interesting. I'll have to get that back for you one day. Let's go back to the for loop examples. This is neat. Let me just take that out. The for loop examples. Here we go. So I've got a bunch of them here, and you can look at it at your own leisure. Keep in mind, whenever you do things like rate decimal, you still got to put in this formatting character. Example, rate decimal is equal to 0.05 m. Rate decimal is less than 0.25 m. And then increment rate decimal by 0.05 m every loop, every cycle. And again, when it comes to loops, we always talk about cycles. How many cycles are going on in the loop, right? Every cycle, your counter should be incremented to the point where your loop approaches the condition that's going to exit it. Okay, negative increment. You can also do backward counting by using the count integer minus minus or other kind of code in here. Count integer minus equals as another example, or minus whatever something else is. So that way you can, and the middle condition is saying as long as count integer is greater than 0. So if it goes to equal to 0 or less than 0, then the condition will terminate. Condition satisfied before entry. So let's say, for example, in this particular case, right, if our final integer is 5 and index integer is 6, then, and if I'm comparing index integer is less than final integer, this loop will never fire. This cycle will never go off. This whole code block will be ignored. Why? Because our initial condition, right, index integer is equal to 6, is greater than, it disqualifies this comparison in the middle, right? So it'll never happen. So that's possible. And then there's also the endless loop scenario where, you know, as an example, you've got some programming happening. Your index integer is equal to 1, and your index integer is less than 10, and then your index integer plus plus, and then you're modifying your index integer down here to 1. That's bad. Because that would be like a condition to make sure this thing runs forever. When is it good to have an endless loop? There is a good condition, a good reason to have an endless loop. Yeah. Game loop. That's a great way to, yeah, because then you still want to have an exit condition, so it's technically not endless, but you want to create a loop where you don't need to count. It's like a while loop. So while keep going is equal to true, as an example would be the condition, or while keep going, so my game is going, right? Then do all this stuff, and it's going to continue until somewhere in the game I'm going to break out, right? And you can have a break statement inside a loop to break out of the loop as well. That's another way you can do it. And I talk about that here. When you choose close the actual form itself, it'll break the loop. You can set a breakpoint to break the loop, and you can use a break statement to break the loop. Okay? You can also use the continue statement, also bad programming, don't recommend that you do that, to continue through the loop. So say, okay, I've done these 3 iterations. I don't need to do the 4th, 5th, or 6th one in this loop. Continue. Right? I wouldn't recommend it. I think then you're using the wrong kind of loop. Right? Because then the condition you're checking at the top isn't right, most likely. But it's possible you can use the continue statement. Okay, making entries appear selected. How do we do that? If it's a new item text box, again, you can use the select all statement, just like we learned in the previous lesson. If it's a label, there is no select all method in a label, right? So if you want to do some validation for user entry, a label doesn't need a select all, right? A text box does, and this is how you select everything in the text box. So if you do some validation and you make a user get focus in a particular text box again because he entered the wrong information, use whatever the text box is, .focus, to get focus, and then select everything, select all. And that would force the user to re-enter his text again. Sending information to the printer. This is the most annoying part of it, I'll be honest with you, and I want to skip it, but I have to show you. So here we go. So we have a couple of things here. The print document and the print preview dialog components that are built into Visual Studio. And again, just like it says here at the bottom of my slide, I would recommend that you download the Crystal Reports extension for Visual Studio when you do your own work, and learn how to use the Crystal Reports extension properly, because it produces much more robust reporting than the stuff that's built into Visual Studio. And you're not going to reinvent the wheel, okay? Yes, you get coded on your own, and we're going to show you how to do that. But it's a pain in the ass, and it's not done with absolute numbers. Yes?
So that's like the thing that'll change it from where it prints the stupid window to actually being
Nice.
A readable document.
Yeah, we're going to do that too, manually, but Crystal Reports is already built for you. I mean, and again, I'm for, mostly, I'll be honest with you, I prefer, if I'm programming, open source tools, okay? I like using Dreamweaver, but you know what? Eclipse is fine. It's okay. I like using Visual Studio, but if I'm going to program, I'm probably not going to use C#. I might use C++, and I can use Eclipse for that too, right? So I'm saying, in most environments, and C++ is cross-platform. C# is not, right? So again, there's an advantage of doing that. And the same token, I like to use stuff that's already pre-made. If I'm forced to use Visual Studio because the company I'm working for wants to use .NET technologies, I'm using Crystal Reports. I'm not going to write my own, graphics for the printing. Just too much work and not enough payback for the amount of hours you have to spend making it all work properly. Unless someone's looking for custom reporting, and again, in which case, Crystal Reports is great too. So this is how you do it. You go to your print document component, you grab it, and then you select it and put it into your component tray. The component tray itself, you can have more than one print document component. And again, an example of this would be, if we go back to my main form here, if you notice, here's my hands-on assignment for lesson 7. I have a bunch of them. I have a print all print document, and I have print selected print document. So I have different options. These two things will fire, right, depending on my options. So if I go here and I say print all flavors or print selected flavors, there'll be different printing options here that I can define. Okay? So this is why we do them. I don't know why it's so loud. Maybe they're the glow-in-the-dark people. Let's go back here. So here's an example. If I'm using my print button.click, I'm going to access the print function by print document one.print, just like you would normally think, right? And when we do that, when I go print document one.print, the print event fires from my print document component. Okay, the print event fires. So if I go down to my component now, let me just go down to the print page. Well, I guess I'll take it one step at a time. So we're going to write it in the print page event handler, right? And basically, it's fired each time the page is you click on to be printed, right? And this is called a callback. It's probably the first time you're going to hear in Visual Studio or C# what a callback is. And a callback, right? The object notifies the program that it needs to do something, or that situation exists. The program needs to handle. So there's almost like, hey, I need to have an event handler. When I call a print, I'm actually using the print callback feature to make sure that print event handler fires. Okay? And there's a couple of also other events you can use for print document, which are begin print and end print, where you can actually use other events, other things to put stuff in there when the document starts printing or ends printing. You can actually poll the user and say, do you want to print this again? And when it's end print is ready to go. Or begin print, are you sure? You know, as an example. Do you want to save your work? You know, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with these events. It gives you options. So the graphics page, and the way C# and Visual Studio kind of lays things out is X and Y coordinates happen from the top left corner. Again, the coordinate system is not the Cartesian coordinate system. Cartesian coordinate system would work on the bottom left, right? Where you have the graph, this is 0, 0. It's not so. And on a page, 0, 0 is on the top left, just like it is for every programming language pretty much out there. Unless you're using something like, if you're doing some game programming and there might be a custom game environment that uses 0, 0 on the bottom left. Okay. So you can use X and Y coordinates as well as, because it's an overloaded constructor here for our graphic elements, right? You can also use a point structure or a rectangle structure. But we're not going to cover that. We're going to just cover points X and Y coordinates. So you use the drawstring method of the graphic object, which we're going to see, to actually draw the objects onto the printer. You can also use the same drawstring object to draw objects to the page, to the document, not just the printer. So we'll cover that later on in the course when we're talking about drawing and that kind of thing. We'll kind of do a small thing on how to draw objects. Okay. So here's the general form. So whatever the graphics object is, dot the drawstring, and then you want to say, here's my string to print. I want to define a font, a brush. Normally it's black, right, for most printers. Again, nowadays you have a lot more color printers. You might want to choose the brush color. Our X coordinate and Y coordinate. And again, this could also be, instead of X coordinate and Y coordinate, the general form has an overloaded constructor, which allows you to put in a rectangle instead of X and Y coordinates. And here's some examples. E, dot, graphics, dot, drawstring, really ugly. And then your print line string, your print font, your brush is black, your horizontal print location float, and your vertical print location float will tell you where exactly on the page you're printing. Okay? So absolute numbers. You have to know how many pixels are on your page. It's not relative printing at all. You have to know pixel by pixel where exactly you want to print on the page, which, like I said, is quite a bit of tedium. Okay. You can also use other things like left margin float and current line float and so on, which we'll define later on. So again, before executing the drawstring method, set up your font and the X and Y coordinates. That's a good practice. If you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. Okay, so here's an example of that. So you definitely want to use your horizontal and vertical print location, like your X and Y coordinates. They have to be float data types. Okay, on the VB side, they were singles. On the C# side, they're floats. Don't ask why. It's just the way they do them. We're more accurate on the C# side, I guess. And again, here's an example of this as well. You can use the horizontal print location float as e.marginbounds.left. So if you want the leftmost margin, right, you want to start printing there for the horizontal print location, that's not a bad thing to do, because you can use your margin bounds on your page. At least there's a relative marker right there, right? And the same thing for your vertical print location float. You want to start at the top left corner of your margin, right? So margin bounds top and margin bounds left will put your first print location right at the top left corner of your margins. And you can define the margins for your page and so on if you'd like to do that. Here's some example, printing multiple lines. What you want to do is you want to use the line height float and basically look at the font. So here's your font. I've defined a new font called print font. This is the way to do it. New font, it's an Arial 12 point. And then you're going to say, well, I want to create this new float data type. Line height float is equal to your font height with the get height option. That's what you're doing here. And then again, we're using horizontal print location and vertical print location to left and top margin bounds. You're going to set up your print line. So you're going to say my print string is equal to program by yours truly. Thank you very much. Right? And then you're going to print a line. E graphics drawstring, your print line string, programmed by your name. Your print font, Arial 12. Brushes, black, and there's different brushes. Horizontal print location float, which is margin bound left. And vertical print location float, which is margin bounds top. That's where you're going to start printing. And then what you're going to do is you're going to increment your vertical position by the height of the line. And that's how you're going to go to the next line. So, quite a bit of tedium, lots of control using this method, but not a lot of use in the real world. Unless you're actually printing to the screen, in which case this is absolute X and Y coordinate system that you can use the exact same way. Instead of printing to the printer, you're printing to the screen, which we'll learn later on. So it's good to know for that. So again, here's a printing summary. At the top of the event handling method, define the fonts, line height, X and Y coordinates, set up the line to print the line, increment the Y coordinate if another line will be printed, and then place steps 2 to 3 and 4 inside a loop, and if there are multiple lines to print. So just kind of loop that through, and you just keep printing. 2, 3, and 4. Set up the line to print, a new text, print it, increment your vertical variable, so you go down to the next line. Done. Printing the contents of a list box. So here's your print line string, and what you're going to say is your coffee combo.items index integer. So you're looking at this items collection, and you're looking at a specific index of your items collection. Just print that particular item first, right? You're going to start printing that, and then what you're going to do is you're going to print. This is just the items collection, and this index integer is it's in a for loop, right? So it's going to run in a for loop, and every item is going to be printed. Boop, 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 and then you're going to increment your line height every time an item is printed, every cycle. A selected item from the list, instead of looping, you don't have a loop. Okay. Aligning decimal columns. This is a pain in the ass too, because basically you're printing, but you want to align because of our font. Our fonts are kind of relative and certain or proportional, so that way, depending on the size of your character, they're not, equivalent. All the letters are small, slightly wider, or whatever, so that it becomes a problem when you're printing decimals. So how do you do that? And there's a way of doing it. The best approach is to format each number as you want it to print, and then measure the length of the formatted string, right? And then you want to basically set up so that the dots line up over themselves, right? So how do we do that? We require a couple more elements. You have an object called the size F structure, which has a width property, and you need to use this measure string method of the graphics class. So you say, how many pixels, how wide is the number of pixels of my actual string that I'm printing? How wide is it? And if the same unit of measure is used for X and Y coordinates, so the drawstring method, it's the same thing. X and Y is the same. And here's some examples of how to do it at position 500. So again, you have your font, your line height float, which is your get height, your Y float, which is your margins top, and then you're in a for loop, and I probably should have spaced this out a little better for the next class of people that are here. Yes, I'm making adjustments to my presentation on the fly. Thank you very much. Decimal index decimal is equal to 0m, so 0 would be a decimal, right? And then as long as the decimal is less than 2,000 pixels, increment your decimal by 500 pixels, right? So it's quite a big jump, right? And this is what I'm saying is I'm jumping to that particular location. So how do I do it? My graphics drawstring text. This is the text I'm printing. My print font. My brushes, my brushes being black, my margins being left, and my Y float wherever it is, and then I'm going to format my string, my outputted string, as a number, right? And I'm going to put it one on top of each other, basically. Size F is I'm going to define a new font size, right? That's the size of my actual string, and I measure my string itself. So here's my formatted output string. So I'm going to format it first, add the $sign or whatever, and then measure it. I'm not going to measure it first and then format it. That doesn't make any sense, right? And then I'm going to say my column 2 float is 500F, so 500 pixels minus my font size width, and that'll give me the exact location that I'm going to print, so my dots all overlap or all on top of each other. Whew. Like I said, complexity for nothing. Displaying a print preview, here's a great way of doing that. You've got your print preview dialog 1. So again, if I go back to my actual document, here's my print preview dialog component, right? And this time I'm going to display a print preview. I'm going to say print preview dialog, the document is equal to print all print document, and this is another print document that I'm accessing. So for example, if you go back to my my application again, here's my print all print document component, and my print preview dialog is saying print this one. Use this print method when I use my print preview dialog, and you can have more than one. So you can say, well, in this case, print the selected ones in print preview dialog. Use my print preview on this one. And you can specify. That's why it's good to have more than one print document component defined, and different events for that component also defined. And if I look at my my code, inside my code, if you look through here, see if I can find it for you. And it's down here. Here it is. So here's my print all print document print page event, right? So whenever I send anything to my print all print document handler, right, it does these things. And if I go to my selected print document handler, so only the selected items, it does these things. And that's how it's done. It's exactly the same stuff. I just want to handle when I select only one item compared to all items, right? And you can do print previews for both of them. Okay, again, if you want to look at an example, the code in Blackboard is a good example of that. I will not ask you to do this on an assignment because I find it useless. Yes. It's a pain in the ass. That's a lot of stuff to remember, and you know what? Like I said, in real life, you'd probably use crystal reports. I'm just going through this so you can see it. But the similar stuff we do with the e.graphics.drawString object that we're using is exactly the way we printed the screen instead of the printer, right? We're just using a different medium. It's actually very similar when we print to other mediums as well. Okay. So let's go back. And then we're going to use a show dialog, because when we do a print preview, it's a show dialog, just like we do the print preview with our Visual Basic Power Packs when we did it in the first lesson. Same kind of thing, except much more complex, more control, and you can specify how the page is going to look like. Again, for my assignments, it's going to be using the Visual Basic Power Packs version of the printing. So you're going to have a print option, it's going to be that. Because that's enough for you guys for this course, right? If I wanted to cover printing in detail, I need another couple lessons with crystal reports, and I don't have the time. So I apologize in advance. And those fine people at crystal reports, if they're listening to this thing, can know that I use it all the time, and awesome stuff. Hands-on programming we're not going to do today. We're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to wrap up. But basically, with the hands-on programming, what I want to do is look at a couple things here on the this is the finished product that we're looking at. And one thing that we want to look at also is that your file, again, if you notice how we have file, edit, and help, right? It's, again, when you make your menus, make sure you do it like this. Some people don't, for some reason. They've mixed these things up. They made their own way of doing things. You want to stick to the Windows way. So file, edit, help would be a good way of doing it, right, where your about box is here. One thing I didn't cover, which I want to kind of loop back on, is I want to cover the splash screen again. And what if, as an example on the splash screen, you want to add in your link to your assembly information, right? How do I do that, right? So there's some tricks. I tell you some tricks. Visual Basic, right, unfortunately, has a built-in splash screen. They do. Has it, right? So what if I was to steal the splash screen from Visual Basic, right, and use it with C#? Can I do that? And the answer is yes, I can, right? I can take the design element of the splash screen, not the actual coding piece at all, drag and drop it and create my own form. So I recommend look into that as an option for yourself. When you do, you get a splash screen that looks like this. So let me just close this down. Nope. And we'll close the solution down. And I'm going to open up that solution that I was just working on before we left. I probably should stop my recording and restart it, but hey, we only have 20 minutes, and I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to open up my that solution we were just doing, which was that test solution for number 7. So not where the hell did I put it? Oh, here it is. Test project 1. So if I want to add this splash screen, okay, so here's my solution again, and I haven't added any validation going back to this. I recommend you look at some the stuff that I put on in Multiform to figure out how to do the validation. But I want to add a splash screen to this. There's a couple ways I can do it. I create my own splash screen by going Project, add new item, or add new form, as an example, right? I could do that. So Project, add new Windows form. Or I could add existing item to my form, right, to my project, which is I already have a splash screen that I made in another project, right? So how do I do that? I know I have my projects in my projects file. I have in lesson 6, I believe, in my hands-on. I know I created a splash screen. So here we go. Here's my splash screen. Let's go open it up here. And if I look through here, if I want to see what my item is, I can see that there's a splash screen here. And remember, when I add an existing item to my application, I want to add the .cs file, not the designer or the resx file. Okay, so if I add this one, add. At the beginning, if you notice, right, my splash screen is just a splash screen, right? And it's up here, right? My solution is. And by the way, I've added it to the wrong place. Let's just undo that. Let's just close that off because I'm just like, not paying attention. Let's do that again. File, open, project solution. Go back down to, I got to show you how to do this, guys. There's an issue. For my test solution. And here, when I click on this, now I'm going to go File, Add Existing Item. I'm going to go back to my projects less than 6, because that's where I did it. And here's my splash screen. I'll be okay. There's a reason why I'm doing this. Just bear with me. Okay, so here's my splash screen. If I click onto it, it displays. And if you notice, it looks like the same way, but there's a problem. If I go to View Code, what do I see as my namespace? Why? That's where I got it from. I just copied a file. I copied my namespace from there to this. Will this work, this splash screen in my existing file? No, it will not. So if you copy a piece of code from somewhere else and you're like, hey, I want to make this work and whatever, you need to change your namespace around, right? And that's all you need to do. An example of that would be, I already have my namespace, what it's called, right? So if I go to my main form, here's my main form, right? And I want to look at my code, I have my namespace. It's test project 1. So I can do this, being lazy, copy, right? Going over to my splash screen and then highlight this and paste, right? And once I do that and I save, now my splash screen is now available to the rest of my project. Otherwise, it would never have been. Okay? Now, in order for me to attach my splash screen, I need a couple of components in my code. All right? So one thing is this. If I go to my splash screen itself, you notice that the timer component is already there, and it's set to 3,000. I want to change that to 4,000, just because I feel like it. But if I look at the code for my splash screen itself, so let's take a look at the code. Inside here, what have I done? I've got a bunch of assembly product information, and I had to add in there some of the same assembly structure that I found in my about form. So that's what I did. I took my about form, I extracted the assembly information, and I threw it into my splash screen. Okay, so here it is. Here's my name. And by the way, this splash screen is online for you in both hands-on for number 6, lesson 6, and for this last little project mini project that I put together for you guys for today, right? Which is multi-form revisited. So here's my assembly getters and setters and so on. I have all this information, and then what it does, it links to the assembly information just like my about form, okay? And it actually has a built-in, the timer.click has already been defined because you know what? The splash screen's already been made. And all I've done is take this splash screen, that's what I'm talking about making these tools for yourself, and thrown it into my form. So it's working. That's good. Now, I've got to attach it inside my program.cs file. All right, so here it is. Where do I put it? Does anyone remember? Before here, right? I've got to instantiate it, just like we normally do. So again, I would go splash screen 1. That would be the name of the form that I added in, right? And then my splash screen, or maybe just splash form, because we don't have that, right, is equal to new splash screen 1, right? And then what I want to do is I want to show it, right? Now, I'd like to show it as a show dialog, right? But you can also show it as use the show method as well. So splash form, and you can tell me what's better one way or the other. So here's my splash form dot show dialog, right? Why would I want to use show dialog as opposed to just a show? Yes, I always ask you guys. You don't want drag and drop it. It's going to disappear, but that means it doesn't stop the other thing from something else from happening at the same time. It'll go away, right? But it's better, in most cases, to use a show dialog for splash screens, okay? I wanted to cover that as well with you. So let's try this out. So we'll run it, and here's my custom splash screen in the middle. Test project 0001. It gets the assembly information, and then with 4 seconds, it goes to my app, okay? So make your splash screen, steal my splash screen from hands-on, right, or even from the last stuff I gave you, and whenever I ask for a darn splash screen, change the graphics, right? You have the assembly information right there, right? Don't reinvent the wheel, guys. Free marks, right? And that's it for me today. We'll get together next week. Next week we're going to cover arrays. Please do not miss next week. It's an important week. Or watch the video.